From a very young age, I learned a feeling no child should ever have to know. The feeling of being there, but not really being seen. My name is Charlotte Hayes. I'm 30 years old. And if you asked me what family means, love wouldn't be the first word that comes to mind. I think of silence. I think of dinners where my voice was cut off halfway through. I think of the way my parents' eyes would pass right over me, as if I were just part of the background, a faded layer behind a brighter picture. A picture named Sophie, my younger sister. People often say sibling rivalry is normal, but between me and Sophie, it was never rivalry. It was erasure. I wasn't worse. I wasn't a problem. I didn't act out. I just wasn't interesting enough to be noticed. And the most painful part wasn't that my sister was loved more. It was realizing, day by day, that I was slowly disappearing inside my own home.
For a while, I convinced myself that everything was just temporary. When Sophie was born, I was only 4. I still remember how my mom used to sit by my bed every night, reading me stories and kissing my forehead before turning off the lights. My dad used to proudly show my messy little drawings to the neighbors. I used to be their joy. So when the attention started to shift, I didn't push back. I thought it was only natural. A newborn needs more care after all. But those natural things, they didn't pass. They stretched on for years. My mom started missing my soccer games because Sophie had a cold. My dad forgot to ask about my grades because Sophie had just learned a new song. And every time I would smile and say it was okay. I got used to giving my moments away. I believed that if I were patient enough, understanding enough, everything would eventually go back to the way it was. What I didn't realize was that this was only the beginning of a quiet replacement, and I was the one being replaced.
As I got a little older, I started to realize this wasn't about small things anymore. It had become a pattern, one that repeated itself so clearly, I couldn't lie to myself about it any longer. Every time I achieved something, the atmosphere at home would brighten, but only for a few brief minutes. Then, just as quickly, it would shift back to something about Sophie. She didn't even have to try that hard. All it took was a well-timed laugh, a casual interruption that seemed harmless. And just like that, all the attention would return to her. I remember one dinner in particular. I was excited, talking about a science project I had spent weeks preparing. I had practiced in front of the mirror. I had been waiting, hoping to hear, "We're proud of you." But before I could even finish my sentence, Sophie burst out laughing at something completely unrelated. My mom turned to her immediately. So did my dad. My story disappeared into the air, as if it had never existed. No one asked her to wait. No one asked me to continue. That was the moment I began to understand something painful. This wasn't accidental anymore. Sophie liked the attention, and my parents, without even realizing it, kept feeding that dynamic by always putting her first. When Sophie made mistakes, they stepped in to fix things. When I pushed myself to do better, it was simply expected. I became the reliable child, and she became the one who needed protecting. And the most dangerous part? I started to believe that if I wanted to be seen, I had to do more, be better, be perfect. I studied until I was exhausted. I joined activities I didn't even enjoy. I forced myself into a version that couldn't be criticized. But the truth is, when a family gets used to seeing you as the background, no matter how brightly you shine, they'll find a way to dim that light. If you've ever felt like you had to try twice as hard just to receive half the recognition, type 1 in the comments below. Not to complain, but to remind yourself that you're not imagining it.
There was something I didn't have the maturity to name until much later. The issue was never that Sophie was loved more. The real problem was that she needed to be the center of everything. And my parents, whether they realized it or not, turned that need into an unspoken rule in our home. Sophie wasn't loud in an obvious way. She didn't scream or create chaos in the middle of the living room. She was more subtle than that. A quiet sigh right when I was being praised. A tearful look just as attention started shifting toward me. A soft, almost innocent line. I want to try too. And just like that, the direction of the entire room would change. I used to think it was coincidence, but coincidence doesn't repeat itself for over a decade. When I got the highest grade in class, my mom said, "Good job, you've always been hardworking." Then turned to Sophie. "And what about you? Do you need help with your homework?" When I was chosen as captain of the soccer team, my dad nodded with approval. But that same evening, he spent hours listening to Sophie talk about a small conflict with her friends. My achievements were acknowledged like responsibilities fulfilled. Sophie's emotions were treated like important events. Slowly, I began to understand my role. I was the child who didn't cause trouble, the one who could handle things on her own, the strong one. And because I was fine, I didn't need to be prioritized. Sophie was different. She was sensitive. She needed protection. It sounds harmless, doesn't it? But in a family, when one child is always expected to be understanding and the other is always seen as needing care, that imbalance grows over time. I remember when Sophie was 14, she got caught spray painting a building with her friends. Instead of facing serious consequences, she was brought home with a light warning, thanks to my dad's connections. That night, my mom sat beside her in the kitchen, holding her hand, asking about every detail. My dad explained it away, saying, "Teenagers make impulsive choices." No one asked what I thought. No one talked about how wrong it actually was. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. Sophie wasn't just forgiven. She was protected from consequences. And me? I learned that if I made a mistake, no one would step in to fix it. If I fell, I had to get back up on my own. If I was hurt, it was better to stay quiet. That mindset slowly changed me. I stopped trying to be loved. I started trying not to be a burden. I made my feelings smaller. I learned to swallow my frustration. Every time Sophie interrupted, every time my parents overlooked me, I told myself, don't make it a big deal. Be more mature. But that forced maturity didn't make me stronger. It just pulled me further away from myself. At some point, I didn't even know what I truly felt anymore. All I knew was that whenever I walked into the living room, I would automatically scan for Sophie, where she was, how she was feeling, whether she needed attention that day. My life began to revolve around avoiding her orbit. This wasn't sibling rivalry anymore. It was a system, a structure, a family dynamic where one person was always the sun, and the other had to learn how to live in the shadows. And the scariest part wasn't that I was overshadowed. It was that I started accepting that role as normal. I stopped expecting, stopped reacting, stopped believing I deserved to be seen. And that silence, it fed Sophie. And little by little, it erased me.
If I had to point to a specific moment when I realized I no longer belonged in that family, it wouldn't be a big argument. There were no raised voices, no doors slammed. Everything happened slowly, almost politely, and somehow that made it hurt even more. My 18th birthday is a perfect example. That year, my parents actually threw me a proper party. There was cake, relatives, a few close friends. The house was decorated with silver and white balloons. For the first time in years, I let myself hope. I stood in the middle of the living room, watching everyone laugh and talk, and I thought, maybe this time it's about me. Maybe today I don't have to stand behind anyone. Then the phone rang. I still remember the look on my dad's face when he picked it up. The room slowly fell silent. He said just one name: Sophie. She had been caught vandalizing public property with her friends. The others got away. She didn't. And thanks to my dad's connections, things were handled with just a warning. When they brought Sophie home, my party ended right then and there, even though no one said it out loud. My mom pulled her into the kitchen, wrapped her in her arms, asking if she was scared, if anyone had been harsh with her. My dad spoke firmly, but his eyes were full of concern. And me? I stood in the living room, still holding the cake knife. No one sang. No one gathered around me. The candle sat untouched on the cake. I cut it myself. The first slice tasted empty. I didn't cry. I just understood something simple. That day was never really mine. 3 years later, when I was 21, I got my first full-time job, the one I had worked so hard for throughout university. I drove home, excited in a way that felt almost childish. I imagined my mom hugging me, my dad shaking my hand, proud. Maybe, just maybe, they'd say they were proud of me. But when I walked into the living room, Sophie was sitting between my parents, holding her boyfriend's hand. The air was tense. She announced her engagement. At 17. The room exploded. My mom burst into tears. My dad laughed out loud. Questions poured in. Congratulations followed. All eyes were on her. I stood there, my bag still on my shoulder, and suddenly my good news felt meaningless. I tried to speak. I really did. But my mom turned to me and said, "Can you tell us later?" Later. I hate that word. Because later never came. That night, for the first time, I said everything I had been holding in for years. I told them it wasn't fair, that I was tired of always being pushed aside, that every time I achieved something, Sophie somehow turned it into her moment. They looked at me like I was overreacting. Be happy for your sister. You're too sensitive. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. Nothing. That was the word that broke something inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the final thread snapping. A few days later, I packed my things and left. No announcement. No tears. No second chances. Because staying in a place where you don't exist hurts more than walking away alone. And for the first time in my life, I chose myself.
For 9 years, I had no contact with my family. No Christmases, no birthdays, no forced gatherings where I had to pretend that everything was fine. 9 years is long enough for a person to change. And I did. I worked like there was no one standing behind me. Because there wasn't. I saved every dollar, taught myself new skills, stayed at the office until the hallway lights were almost completely off. I stopped trying to be recognized. I just wanted to build a life no one could take away from me. And then, 2 years ago, I bought a house. Not a luxury mansion, but it was mine, the first home in my name. When I held the keys in my hand, I stood outside the door for a long time. The house was painted white, with a large window that caught the afternoon sun. Inside, there was still the scent of fresh wood and paint. I stepped in, my shoes echoing softly on the empty floor. No one was there. No interruptions. No one taking my moment away. Everything in that house was chosen by me. The curtains, the light gray sofa, the oak coffee table in the center of the living room. Every detail was my decision. And for the first time in my life, I had a space where no one could make me feel invisible. I was careful. I didn't share my address. I made it clear to anyone still in contact with my family, this was a boundary. No surprise visits. No, just happened to be in the area. This house was mine.
and I was going to protect it. At that point, my life was finally on track. My career was growing faster than I expected. Successful projects kept stacking up. Recently, I was even featured on the cover of a local business magazine. When I held that issue in my hands, seeing my name printed boldly beneath my photo, I smiled for a long time. Not because of the recognition, but because for once, that achievement stayed with me. No one took it away. I knew the news would reach Sophie eventually. I could already imagine her reaction, a forced smile, a casual comment like, "It's not that big of a deal." And underneath that, the familiar unease when the spotlight wasn't on her anymore. Sophie had never been able to stand that. And just like I expected, 6 days ago, everything broke. That afternoon, I was getting ready to go out. The air was slightly cold. I locked the door, stepped down the front porch, and froze. My entire house was covered in red paint. Not a few random scribbles, large, aggressive words stretched across the front wall, the garage door, even the wooden door I had painted myself. Fraud, loser, fake. The lines were uneven, forceful, like they were written with uncontrolled anger. The paint was still wet. Red drops ran down in long streaks, like open wounds. I stood there, completely still. The keys were still in my hand. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a message. And when I noticed the small muddy footprints leading toward the sidewalk, a cold feeling ran down my spine. That size, that pattern. I didn't need long to figure it out. For the first time in years, Sophie wasn't just trying to take my light. She was trying to destroy it.
I walked straight inside, my hands shaking, but my mind was strangely clear. I opened the security system, something I had installed just as a precaution, never thinking I'd actually need it. I rewound the footage, frame by frame, my eyes locked onto the screen. And then she appeared, a hoodie pulled low, her steps quick but not panicked. I recognized that walk instantly, the way she glanced around before stepping closer to the door, the way she stepped back just to admire her work. And then the smile. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. That wasn't impulsive. That wasn't out of control. That was satisfaction. I sat there for a long time, not moving. A part of me still wanted another explanation, a misunderstanding, something staged. But deep down, I knew. This was exactly what Sophie had always done, just on a much larger scale. I remembered the notes that used to be slipped under my bedroom door when we were kids, messy handwriting, mocking me, belittling me. I used to crumple them up and tell myself they didn't matter. But now, the bright red words across my walls leaned the same way, the same tilt, the same hand. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a message. You are not allowed to have anything that's bigger than me. I thought about calling the police, but then the memories came back. Every time Sophie got into trouble, and my parents stepped in to make it disappear. Consequences, erased before they could ever reach her. No, this time would be different. I stepped back outside, took photos, recorded videos, captured everything, every streak of paint, every corner, every footprint. Then I clipped the footage, saved it, her face clear. When I was done, I sat on my sofa, staring at my phone for a long time. I could stay silent, like I had for the past 30 years. Or I could let the truth be seen. For the first time in my life, I didn't choose silence.
I posted it that night. No names, no tags, no long explanation. Just the images of my house covered in red paint. The security footage clearly showing Sophie's face. And a short caption. This is what happens when someone can't handle your success. Evidence is here. I didn't shake when I hit post. I didn't feel satisfied either. I just felt clear. Clear that this time I wasn't going to twist the truth to protect anyone. The reaction came faster than I expected. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Comments, shares, messages. Strangers were angry on my behalf. Old friends said they finally understood why I had left all those years ago. Even some relatives, the ones who had always stayed silent, reached out saying they had no idea it was this bad. And Sophie? She lost control. Her first message was calm. "Charlotte, you're overreacting. Take the post down. We're family." Family. That word felt unfamiliar. Because when she vandalized my house, she didn't think about family. The second message offered to pay for the damages. I stared at that line for a long time. I knew the money wouldn't really come from her. It would be my parents, stepping in, cleaning things up like they always had. I replied with one sentence. "A public apology. Admit what you did. Then we'll talk." Within minutes, the tone changed. I was called cruel, overdramatic, accused of ruining her reputation, as if her reputation mattered more than her actions. Then my dad called. He didn't ask if I was okay, didn't ask how bad the damage was. He just said, "You need to take that post down. Do you realize what you're doing to your sister's reputation?" Reputation. I looked at the red paint outside and felt the irony. For the first time in my life, I didn't try to explain myself. I simply said, "If she wants the post gone, she knows what to do." I wasn't looking for their approval anymore. I was setting a boundary. And this time, I wasn't stepping back.
Things spiraled out of control faster than I expected. The post didn't stop at a wave of temporary outrage. People started digging deeper. Former colleagues of Sophie came forward, sharing their own stories. Screenshots, old messages, unpaid debts, promises that were never kept. A bigger picture began to surface. And that's when I realized I was never the only one. Then a group chat leak started circulating. Sophie was laughing about how she could always get away with it, thanks to my dad's connections. At that point, the story wasn't just about my house anymore. It had reached my family's reputation. A few days later, I heard the news. My dad lost his job. Not long after that, the police officially got involved. The evidence was too clear, too public. No one could make it disappear this time. Sophie was charged. And when the court finally delivered its verdict, everything ended the way it should have years ago. For the first time in her life, she had to face real consequences. After everything, my life didn't suddenly become perfect. There wasn't some cinematic moment where I stood in the middle of my living room and felt like I had won. There were still nights when I sat quietly in my home, thinking about my childhood, the dinners where I was cut off mid-sentence, the birthday cake that was never lit. Those memories didn't disappear. They just stopped controlling me. My parents went silent. No more calls, no more asking me to keep the peace for the family. And for the first time, that silence didn't make me feel invisible. It made me feel free. I kept the post up, not out of revenge, but as a reminder of the moment I stopped shrinking myself just to make other people comfortable. Stopped apologizing for existing. Stopped waiting to be seen. Sometimes walking away isn't selfish, it's survival. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, type 1 in the comments below. Not to be loud, but to remind yourself that you deserve to be seen.